They Are Billions releases onto Steam Early Access on the 13th of December 2017 and is developed and published by Numantian Games. They Are Billions is a steampunk real-time strategy game set on a post-apocalyptic planet that is overrun with zombies. You'll need to build a base, gather resources, advance your technology, and grow your colony to defend against waves of the undead. The Early Access edition of They Are Billions has one game mode, Survival. Survival mode creates a randomly generated world and requires you to defend your command center against increasingly numerous waves of infected. Survival mode also gives you the option to adjust the infected present on the map and adjust the game duration. These parameters feed into your score multiplier, with smaller amounts of infected contributing less to your score, etc. Score doesn't amount to much other than bragging rights currently, however beating a terrain type with a 100% score modifier will unlock another terrain type for you to play on. That is deemed a little bit harder in difficulty. So the progression in They Are Billions is basically just survive a map to get another map, and if you have all four, try to achieve the best score possible. As mentioned, there are multiple terrain types. The starting terrain, the Dark Moorland, has a lot of rocky formations and lakes that allow you to funnel the infected into certain areas to make them easier to manage. Harder terrain types offer more open areas and can be lower on resources, making it much more challenging to survive. The building and resource management aspect of They Are Billions is relatively simplistic in design, but offers a substantial amount of variety and depth as the game progresses. Buildings fit into one of 6 categories: housing, resources, energy, industry, military, and defense. They Are Billions also uses a stockpile resource system and a consumable resource system that feed off of each other. You have gold, wood, stone, iron, and oil that can all be gathered in different ways and stockpiled up until you reach a limit. Then you have your population, surplus workers, surplus food, and surplus energy. To explain how this all plays out effectively and simply, I'll just guide you through the natural progression of the game. You start out with a command center and will need to build housing. Houses in the form of tents provide colonists, and colonists generate gold over time and provide workers. Then with those workers, you'll want to gather resources. Sawmills for wood, quarries for stone, and hunting camps for food. Once you start bringing in some resources, you can then start building defenses, cordoning off areas with walls and towers. Then you'll get your first military building and can start recruiting units. As time goes on, you'll eventually build a workshop that allows you to research new technology at the cost of gold. This then allows you to upgrade buildings, such as tents to wooden houses to stone houses, and similarly with wooden walls to stone walls, and better resource producing buildings. It even eventually leads to another tech building, which allows you to improve and build up all over again. So it's a pretty natural progression. You build things, you gather stuff, you use this stuff to build better things to gather more stuff. The goal of course being to get as big as possible, to field as many units as you can, and to create the best defense you can against the infected. But there's always a bit of a problem. You can't just build and expand wherever you want. You need to connect areas with energy. This requires building Tesla towers, which then expands the space you're allowed to build. The other problem is that as you venture out into the fog of war, you'll encounter walls of just idle infected. So you'll need to defend yourself with some walls, then get a brave task force together and start clearing out pockets of infected to make room for your colony's growth. This is a really fun aspect of the game, where you'll build a tower far outside your base, extending your range and then essentially defend it with a few units, and once it goes live, then erect new walls around it. It has a real sense of risk to it. As you're building or extending out your colony, it tends to be a little bit more vulnerable, so if a big attack happens, then you've got a problem, so you want to get done as quickly and as safely as possible. Space is another large resource you'll have to consider. Units will navigate and walk around buildings, so making clear pathways to walls is essential. As well as that, some buildings provide buffs to others, making them more efficient, so building things in proximity helps. The downside of that though, is that if infected do get in, once they get to a building they'll infect it, and the infection can spread really fast within your colony if you're not quick to contain it. Of course, as you reach higher levels then you'll start to field better defenses, and this is reminiscent of many tower defense games. You'll build walls and pathways to potentially try and guide the infected into traps and hotspots for your towers. The tricky thing is though that the infected hordes can come from any direction, so you need to equally defend all of your base if you want the best chances of survival. As well as that, it's a hard system to exploit. It doesn't allow building of multiple lines of walls or building near the infected, so if a horde is on top of your walls pressing in, you can't really just build defenses on top of them. Instead you'll need to fall back a bit and build a second line. That's essentially it for the building and resource management aspects of the game. I think the use of space is extremely clever on Numantian Games' part. You can't just build the same thing on top of each other relentlessly, but are forced to branch out until you have enough to upgrade internally. Then you can redesign your colony if you have the resources. The stockpiling system is fun to manage, as you can halt production on buildings when your stockpiles are full and use the workers elsewhere, or use them for military units in times of need. When I know an attack is coming, I found myself halting production of resources and mass recruiting the extra workers to hold the lines. On the combat side of things, there's a handful of units to use against the infected. You start off with Rangers, a fast-moving, basically silent bow and arrow unit. Then you'll progress to Soldiers, a more armoured rifle-bearing unit. Then you'll get Snipers, a slow, long-range one-hit kill unit, and then you'll get Lucifers, a sort of tanky flamethrower unit. There's also a few higher tier units such as Thantoses and Titans, which are essentially mech units that cost a lot of money to get. Each unit has different strengths and suits different situations. For instance, noise is a factor when interacting the infected, so bow and arrow units are good to go out exploring and scavenging, and maybe slowly clearing out areas. They can also fire over the walls, just as many units can, but the bigger units like Lucifers cannot, so only when the infected break in are they useful, or if you're on the offensive. The infected come in different shapes and sizes too. There are regular walkers, among which there are some faster units with a bit more health. Then there's the chubbies, that are big tanky brutal units. There's a harpy type unit that leaps over the walls and rushes you, and there's a weird golem looking one that spits acid on grouped units. So there's actually a nice amount of variety to think about and keep the exploration game interesting. When you build walls and towers, you can place up to 4 units in the towers to extend their range and visibility. You can also get defensive shock towers that do area of effect damage periodically, ballistas to cause knockback, and spike traps to slow units, so you have a lot of options for setting up choke points and defenses. The infected have also overrun other towns on the map. They're just static buildings that have been overrun, but if you manage to push out and destroy their buildings, you can actually get instant resources from them, which can be very useful. Soldiers that do a lot of fighting will also gain veterancy, so if you want to be efficient, it can be worth rotating the veterans off of the towers to try and rank everyone up together for when the bigger attacks occur. So survival mode is all about the Horde's massive attacks. You'll receive a warning giving you the vague direction to expect the attack, and a short countdown timer that buys you a little bit of time to reorganize your forces. The interesting thing is that when you know an attack is coming, you'll have to decide how much is worth sending to defend that point. Often you'll get attacked by a big horde, and smaller attacks will happen elsewhere, so you can't just abandon your walls and rush to the big threat. You have to make the difficult choice of how much you can afford to send. It's a really fun balancing act. Once the horde makes its way onto the map, you'll see an icon of where they're traveling on the radar as they approach your base. It's tricky to tell where they'll hit sometimes, as I've often lost the game because I'll stack up on one wall, expecting them to arrive there, only for them to navigate down a certain pathway and be redirected into a different area. This is really just the part of the game that you just have to hope that your defense holds. Depending on the layout, you might be able to send some units out and around to take pressure off the walls and distract the back of the horde. You can also select priorities for units, so for snipers I like to prioritize the important units, and for soldiers I switch it to fire at the closest enemy. If your defense holds, then great. If it doesn't, they'll pour in, and as they reach different buildings and destroy them, more and more infected will pour out, and your base will collapse pretty quick. Typically speaking, if they breach your wall with any significant force, it's probably GG. You can build fallback lines and towers, but in my experience so far, if you lose a sector, your economy falls behind a bit, and then the next attack will probably take you out. So how does it play overall? I think They Are Billions is a lot of fun, however by design it can just be a little bit tedious. Time marches at a steady pace. You can pause the game but not speed it up, and while I actually like that, games do last a very long time. Typically the standard game mode of 100-day survival will last around 3 to 4 hours potentially. The game does save so that you can continue, but my main issue is that you might be really slow in hour 1 and 2, and then lose in hour 3 because of it. So it can be a little bit off-putting to think that you're doing well, only to be hit with a loss because of something you weren't doing quite right. You don't necessarily know until you've hit the 3rd or 4th hour that, I should have done something better in my 1st or 2nd hour. If you are doing everything right, then the gameplay is just kind of the same each game. In that respect, the game is kind of binary. Either you're doing it efficiently and will win, or you're not and you'll lose. The random map generation gives you a little bit more replayability, and so does the mayor system. This is basically a random perk system that gives you a choice between 2 mayors every few hundred colonists. It can change the gameplay a little bit, giving you earlier tech, unique units, or a little bit of currency. But I think fundamentally, the first hour to 2 hours of the game are gonna always kinda be the same. You're probably good enough to always make it to day 50, so I hope that more variation and explorable areas on the map get created, just to give you a little bit more reason to play multiple times. This is an early access game and there will be campaign in the next few months, so there will be more to do eventually, but just as it stands now, beating my own score isn't enough of a motivator for me to go back again and again, although I really enjoyed what I have played, and I'll keep grinding until I unlock all the maps. The presentation of They Are Billions is excellent. Even the idea of a steampunk Victorian zombie survival game is such a cool premise, but it's actually executed in a beautiful and crisp art style. The UI is extremely clear and concise, the building menus are organised very well, and the radar is very readable. The grid system makes it super easy to figure out the range of things like electricity and defences. Even the selection icons and the health bars are just extremely sharp and relay a lot of info, like the path they're taking or the amount of health before the building stops functioning. UI is often overlooked unless there's something wrong with it, so I just wanted to point out the ease of navigating it here. There's also a nice help section with tips and stuff that really breaks the game down into smaller components to let you find something quick to know about it. Also, the music is excellent. It just got updated recently to add a few more tracks. It's totally unique and it never gets old, especially when the Horde are invading and you hear the almost alarm-like music. It begins as a sort of countdown, then ramps up in intensity when the invasion happens. The only audio I felt was weird was some of the dialogue. It felt a little bit cringy perhaps and maybe out of place when the Rangers are saying, "Oh, stop selecting me," or "I had a great night last night, woo." But Numantian Games have kind of pointed this out themselves as a kind of inside joke or something. I guess I'm no fun because I just want serious stuff all the time, but it's something worth mentioning. It kind of took me out of the experience just a tad. As for how the game runs, it runs pretty smooth, at least for me. It has 4K support and plenty of adjustable options as you'd expect. A few times throughout my playthrough the FPS dropped to about half, but it was more of a short lag spike than anything, and my FPS never dropped while I was being attacked by a big horde, even while I was recording. So for those wondering, the They Are Billions engine supports up to 20,000 entities on screen. So it's not billions, but it's damn impressive even when half of that is present, and they move almost like liquid, breaking open a wall and flooding in past it. There's a great feeling of momentum with the horde, and it's such a relief when their numbers start to dissipate. They Are Billions is an extremely unique game. It's a colony sim with elements of tower defense and RTS combat in a very unique setting. The game looks and runs great, the price point is quite affordable, and the game mode it offers will get about 15 or more hours out of you as it stands. However, it is a bit of a one-trick pony. Learning the systems and playing efficiently will always yield similar results. With no real progression systems, multiplayer or workshop integration, the game just does one thing very, very well. Obviously this is an early access game, but I've reviewed it here as if it was a fully released standalone game. It's great that it will get better as time goes on, and delivering a campaign along with more community feedback will build up the game on an already strong foundation. They say the price of the game may change in the future also, so when They Are Billions comes out of early access, I'll come back for another review. Make sure you let me know what you think of They Are Billions and let me know what you thought of the review. Consider liking or sharing the video on your favorite sites to help the channel grow. It really, really, really helps. Reviews for Republic of Play are primarily funded through Patreon. I couldn't do this without the backing I have there, so thank you very much for the support. If you like this content and want to support it further, please consider supporting on Patreon. Absolutely anything helps, and you get rewards that grant you a say in what games and DLC we cover next. Also check out the social links below. We've got a nice and friendly Discord server and Steam group you can join. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.